Okay, what I want to talk about now is I want to talk about the part that we skipped in lesson set 20 2 weeks ago, which was a line parallel to a given line. Last week, you had 3 IXLs to do. They were all in 8th grade. You had to do 8.y.1, and you had to do 8.y.2, and you had to do 8.y.4. I think it is 8.y.1 where you were given a graph and you had to find the slope. 8.y.2, I believe, is given 2 points. You got to find the slope, which is rise over run. And we've already talked about that before. And then you had to do 8.y.4, which I believe was given an equation for a line, you need to find what is the slope. So just a little, I wanted you to just refresh your memory about slope because that is the key point to lesson 20 when we talk about lines parallel to a given line. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of refresh your memory on some of the graphing. So if I ask you to graph y equals -2, y equals -2 happens to be a horizontal line just at y equals where y has a value of -2. So you go from the origin, and of course the vertical axis is your y-axis, the horizontal axis is your x-axis. So from the origin you're going to go down to, and you want to draw a line that crosses that y-axis at -2. Now if it said something like x equaled 1, or something like that, let's just say that. So if I ask you to graph x is equal to 1, x equals 1 is going to be a vertical line because you're going to find out where does x equal 1 at. So x equals 1 right here at this point, and it will be a vertical line that goes through that point. All right, then, so the only thing that's given to you in this is just which axis it crosses, giving you the x or the y, and the next one is what value. So the next graph that I'm going to give you, oh, by the way, I think that one does happen to be problem 16a in your homework assignment, not the x equals 1. Just the y equals -2. That's 16a on your homework assignment that's due on Sunday. Okay, so the next one, I have asked you to graph y is equal to -2x. Now this one is different from the previous example because what I have done is I have tacked on the x value with it. So when we talk about this graph, we want to remember that the general equation for a line is y is equal to mx plus b. Now m is going to be that coefficient of x. So the number, the numerical value in front of x, remember, represents your slope. And you would have found that out in IXL 8. I believe it was y.4, but it was one of the 3 IXLs that I assigned for you last week. The coefficient of that x value is your slope. And we remember that a positive slope rises up to the right. And we talk about a negative slope goes down as you go from left to right. And I told you one way to remember that is we can make the letter N to talk about a negative slope. We have talked about how a vertical slope, this should all be in some notes that you've probably taken before. If you have a vertical line, that slope is undefined. So we have talked about that before. And then we've also talked about how a horizontal line, the slope of a horizontal line is going to be, we said that creates the z. So the slope of a horizontal line is 0. Now the reason your slopes are that way is because you talk about slope is the same thing as rise over run. So it is the change in the y-axis over the change in the x-axis. So for the IXL that you had, when you were given 2 points, one of them has, oh, and I put that down wrong. One of them has the coordinate point x sub 1, y sub 1. Those are subscripts of 1 designating 1 point. And your other point is x sub 2, y sub 2. So it has the second x, or the second point x value and the second point y value. So when we talk about slope being the change in y over the change in x, we are saying that you take one y value and subtract the other y value from it, and then take one x value and subtract the other x value from it. Now we've done that before, and it does not matter if you do y2 minus y1, but what you have to keep in mind is that your point needs to line up here. Whichever y value you use first, you have to use the corresponding x value first. So like I said, we could say y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So those are the calculations that you had to do on the IXL. So we know that this slope, that's more than what you need for this problem, but the slope is your m value, and then the constant is going to be the y-intercept, where it crosses the y-axis at. Now for this particular problem, we realize that your slope is this value of -2 because we have an x value right now. And if we talk about the y-intercept, there is no constant there, so that is like saying it is +0. So when we went back up to the first problem that we worked with, it says y equals 2. That is your y-intercept. Now when I say x equals 1, one thing we're putting x equals instead of y equals, but this is just telling you the x-intercept, and this is telling you the y-intercept, which tells you if you have a vertical or horizontal line. So if I go back to this next one, which by the way does happen to be part B, oh no, this is not part B in your homework assignment. This is not one on your homework assignment. But if I were to ask you to graph this, I have a y-intercept of 0, so we're going to begin there. So we do put a point at 0 at that y-intercept, and from that point we're going to count our slope. So if I look at -2, keep in mind a slope of -2, if I write that as a fraction, that's -2 over 1. So from your y-intercept, you're going to rise 2. So I go up 2, and I'm going to run 1. Now the question is, which way do I run? So I want a negative slope, and if you remember what I just talked about, a negative slope is going to go down as you go from left to right so you can make your n. And we talked about that in class. So I'm going to go up 2, and to make my n, if I move my point over here, that's not going to create a negative slope, that's going to be a positive slope. So I need to go back 1 to create that positive slope. Now the other thing you can do is some people look at from here, let me finish this. From here you could go up 2 and over 1. The other thing you could do is from this point you could go down 2 over 1 and then just continue that pattern. Your rise is the change in the vertical distance, and your run is the change in the horizontal distance. Now that is different than what you do when you go to graph a point, because a point is horizontal first, which is your x value, and then your y value, which is the vertical distance. So we have our y-axis is the vertical and the x-axis is the horizontal. So we could graph our line from here now. So we're going to have a y-intercept. Don't forget to put the arrow tips on here. So you have a y-intercept of 0 and you have a slope of -2 or -2 over 1. So we have the graph of our line. Now the other thing, sometimes people think of -2. So you have rise and I have -2. That means I'm going to go down 2, and then I have a +1. So I'm going to go to the right 1. So that's another way that you could plot those points. The negative just means you have to move in opposite. So if you move a positive in one direction, you got to move the negative in the other direction. There's multiple ways. I find that most kids just associate to making that n and saying it's a negative slope. So they're going to do rise of 2 and then say, which way do I go to make my n? I got to go to the left for this one to make my negative slope. All right, now the next graph happens to be y is equal to negative 2x minus 2. So to graph this one, what we are going to find out is my y-intercept is negative 2. So this is my y-intercept. And I know that my slope also happens to be a value of negative 2. So once again, you start with the y-intercept, which is negative 2. So from the origin, I'm going to go down 2 to a negative 2. Put a point. That's a point that's telling you where it crosses the y-axis at. Now your slope is negative 2, which means negative 2 over 1. So from here, like I mentioned, some will say go down 2 to the right 1. Or some will say I'm going to rise 2 and I'm going to have to go to the left 1 so that I create that n. And you could continue that pattern from point to point for as long as you wanted to, because the slope is a constant. It never does change in that line. It will always be a rise of 2 and a run of 1 so that it's in the negative direction. Okay, I'm going to turn this into an Edpuzzle, so you'll have to watch it, which you'll find if you watch the Edpuzzle. But I'm limited to 15 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this one. And then I have some more examples to provide to you. This is just review.